Good day, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to another technical summary video presented by me, Letty Janse van Vuren. Our topic for today is South Africa's heightened terrorist financing risk rating. The mere fact that it is heightened, it's been increased, and this is all about documents that FIC issued in response to our risk rating being increased. So the abbreviations that I've used, there's a lot. FIC and FICA, we know, AML, anti-money laundering, TF, terrorist financing, CTF is counter-terrorist financing, TFR is the terrorist financing risk, NRA, national risk assessment. So when you see terms in here called TF NRA, we're talking about the terrorist financing national risk assessment. That's the main document where we are stopping today. TFS is about targeted financial sanctions, which means that there's a list available of all known associates with terrorist activities and with terrorists included in there. So all of your clients, you need to go, if they cause you to be an accountable institution, those are the ones that you will then go and search for on this TFS list. And if they are on there, well, then you've got to stop all action immediately. All right. Lastly, we've got an AI, which is the accountable institution, which might be you in your capacity as a trust company service provider, and it could also be a lot of your other clients, all legal practitioners, all estate agents, and so forth. Right. So those are the abbreviations. Why is this so important? We know that your entities, specifically your accountable institutions, have got to comply with FICA. If they don't, then there's non-compliance with laws and regulations, which means that you've got reporting obligations in terms of NOCLAR that kick in, meaning that you must report it to either management, qualify your audit opinion, or report an RI to IRBA or to SIPC for that matter, depending on the severity of the non-compliance. But you might also need to, as an accountant or as a practitioner, advise your clients who are AIs on compliance with the Property Practitioners Act. Right. And as soon as we were talking about latest guidelines, anything specifically issued by FIC, specifically these ones relating to the heightened TFR, okay, the terrorist financing risk. So yes, your clients have a duty to comply, and they've also got to comply to or adhere to the guidelines and notifications that are issued by FIC. As an introduction, what happened in June this year, South Africa, because we are a regional financial and trading hub, we have been placed on the high alert, okay? And that followed an updated TF NRA, which increased our terrorist financing risk to high. So you can see we are solidly in the red now. So let's just take a step back and say, what is terrorist financing? It is the collection or provision of funds for purpose of enhancing the ability of anybody who is involved in terrorism or terrorist-related activities to commit a terrorist act. So you don't have to be involved in the terrorist act yourself, but if you provide them with financing and they perform the terrorist acts, that's terrorist financing specifically. And terrorist financing comes from a wide range of activities. It could be donations from sympathetic individuals to literally engaging in illicit financial transactions where you give them money and then exploiting legitimate financial systems, right, like the banking systems that we've got. So the terrorist financing risk refers to the probability that the funds or the assets intended are intended for a terrorist organization, and they are then moved or stored or whatever, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate, because we look at the sources now. But that's the probability that the funds are intended for a terrorist organization. The sources of funding here of terrorist financing, you can see we've got legal sources from legitimate sources, and then we've got criminal sources, which I call the illegal sources. So when we're talking about legitimate sources, we are talking about personal donations from businesses and charitable organizations. 9 out of the 10 times these charitable organizations can actually be relating to terrorist activities. They can be a front, and that's how they receive their money. Then we are talking about criminal sources. We're talking about things, if you look at the pictures here at the bottom, we've got the drug trade, we've got smuggling of weapons, we've got other goods, we've got fraud, we've got kidnapping, we've got extortion, right? There's foreign funding as well in here. All of this, right? So fake NGOs and societies, gambling and extortion a lot. So robberies even. There's a lot of criminal sources in South Africa that where this can come from. So the document that was issued by the AML CFT NRA Interdepartmental Working Group. So the AML CFT NRA IWG. That's a whole mouthful. It's just a bunch of people working together, and they then decide what the SA National Terrorist Financing Risk Assessment is. So they did this in June, and the national assessment was then raised from moderate 2 years back to high now as of 2024. And amongst other things, this TF NRI gives us literally a list of the key vulnerabilities that can be used to facilitate terrorist financing. And this is one thing where I find that we don't know enough about terrorist financing. I've never certainly taken an interest in where they get their money from and how they operate and all sorts. So this publication looks at the vulnerabilities. So you've got to know your clients and you've got to know your organization. As an accountable institution, as a business, you've got to know if you are susceptible to terrorist financing risk. All right. So let's go and have a look at some of the important aspects here. The contents of the document, as you can see, it's not a very long document. It's only 8 pages long. So I've given you a little bit more info here. But I mean, this to me, when you think about a terrorist, you think that's an AK-47. That to me is a terrorist weapon. And you can see there's the money in front. So this is literally terrorist financing. So in this document, they look at what is terrorist financing. They look at it in the introduction. They look at terror threats. And then they look at the vulnerabilities. And then lastly, they look at the risks. Now, in addition to this TF NRA, or in response to this, FIC has already gone and they've actually gone and issued sector risk assessments. So they will then go and issue a specific SRA or a sector risk assessment for estate agents, and one for trust company service providers, and one for legal practitioners, and one for dealers in precious stones and gold and precious metals and semi-precious stones. Because they've got to know what their vulnerabilities are. How are they vulnerable, and how can they be abused to perpetrate terrorism or to assist terrorism activities by the funding of that? Because a lot of time, remember, money laundering is all about getting the money from an illegal source, so it's illegal money, and then it's placed into a system that is working, an economy, so it's placed into a bank or inside a company's bank account, and then it's withdrawn afterwards. So after it's washed through your bank accounts, it comes out on the other side, and it now smells like a rose. But now, because now it's no longer drug money, it's, let's say, if they went in to a legal practitioner, and they said to the legal practitioner, "Oh, I want to divorce my wife," and they give them a million rands worth of a retainer. And they then let it go for about 3 weeks, and then they go, "Oh no, well no, I no longer want you divorced. We've made up. Give me back my money." And then they'll say, "Okay, fine. You gave us 1 million, but we've already done letters and whatnot, so we are keeping 100,000. What are the thieves getting? What are the scammers getting back? Or the money launderers are getting back 900,000 rands worth of clean money." Because now it looks like it's a refund from a retainer that they're getting. It's no longer drug money. So it's been placed into a system, it's been washed, and it's been layered. All right. So that's very important. This TF NRA does form the basis for our strategy and our counterterrorism strategy as well, because this looks at where South Africa is vulnerable. So this is really something that every single entity out there has got to now be more aware of. You as an auditor have got to be more aware of how your clients are susceptible to terrorist financing and what it's all about. So some of the important aspects that we are talking about here, FIC have said because of this heightened terrorist financing level now, FIC is encouraging AIs and businesses to literally exercise caution and guard against the risk of being abused. They've got to know how they can be abused. So they have got to be looking inward to say, where are we susceptible to being abused for money laundering purposes? Also, AIs need to use this NRA to conduct their own risk assessments and document it, and then implement safeguards to say, yes, this is also a risk in my area. For our company, this is also a risk, and this is a safeguard that we will put in place. So then the three principles of money laundering detection must be adhered to in terms of the intermediaries in the financial system, so your banks and so on. They need to know with whom they are doing business. Then there's an audit trail of transactions through the financial system that must be preserved. And then lastly, if there are any transactions that are linked to terrorist financing, it must then be brought to the attention of FIC. FIC will then go and they will give the information to the investigating authorities, who will then take it further. All right. But remember, the banks are all accountable institutions in terms of the Bank Act. So they have got certain reporting obligations to FIC, as do legal practitioners, as do estate agents, as does any other accountable institution. So what are these reporting obligations? Well, when you go and you are, let's say you are a trust company service provider, okay? Which means that you provide company formation services for your client. You have registered them on SIP-C, you do their directors and everything like that. Not from a management perspective, but you assist them with that, okay? So you're doing it on their behalf. Then you go and that client of yours, you've then got to go and find them on the TFS list. Now, the TFS list is available on the FIC website. When you submit a trust property report, or even before that, you've got to go and see whether or not your client is on this TFS list, because you are now an accountable institution and they are making you an accountable institution because of the services that you provide for them. You then go and search for their name on the TFS list. If their name pops up, you then have got to do scrutinize, hit, freeze, report. That's your approach. Scrutinize is when you go to the TFS list and you scrutinize for terrorist financing and terrorist property that they might have. As a result of that, if you get a hit on this TFS list, so if your client is there, then you freeze immediately, you don't do any further business with that client, and you report them to FIC. If there's no hit, you just do scrutinize, no hit, continue. Okay. But this is the approach that you have got to follow. So the main reporting obligations that AIs have to FIC, and this is all online, all electronic. Cash threshold reports, the limit is now 49,999. So anything 50,000 Rand and above. Cash transactions there. Suspicious and unusual transaction reports in terms of Section 29. There's a whole section on that, and that's all businesses, not just AIs. Then this is the one for terrorist property reports, and once you become aware that your client possesses property or they're in control of a property that is on by a person that's on the TFS list, that's when you've got to freeze and report immediately. The last one is a new one, the international fund transfer reports. I think that was the Section 31 that they changed now recently. If you want more guidance on TPRs, FIC has issued a guidance note 6A, so you can go and have a look at that one. So the source documents I've given you here, there's your actual TF NRA. There's the media article that FIC published in the Sunday Times advertorial. And quite nice, I've summarized some of the points for you in here, but go and read this article, it's definitely worthwhile. And then I've also been doing other TSVs. I did one specifically on terrorist financing and TFS, specifically as to what you need to look for, when you need to report, how long you've got to report, and all of that. So the TSV is available on our YouTube channel, so you can go and access that one there. Right. That's because of our terrorist financing risk that's increased, what you now need to be more aware of. I trust you enjoyed it. From my side, Letty Janse van Vuren. Thank you and goodbye.